On the eve of the first spring training games, what is Atlanta's opening day roster gonna look like? Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on in to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where it is your Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I am Lindsay Crosby, filling in this week for our host, Jake Mastriani. We'll see him soon. And before we get started, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So, this is a little bit of a tough episode for the Atlanta Braves because there's not a lot of unknowns on the Atlanta Braves roster. Unlike a lot of other teams, a lot of other organizations, we know Atlanta's starting nine right now, and we know 4 of the 5 members of the rotation, without a doubt, barring some sort of injury. We know that defensively, you are lining up Reynaldo López Jr. in right field, Michael Harris II in center, Jared Kelenic in left. The team has confirmed that the plan is to get him every day at bats, even if he struggles a little bit, and just let him work through it. And so takes care of a lot of stuff, and that is going to impact the bench battle, as we'll get to in just a minute. In the infield, you have Matt Olson at first base, who has not missed a game since I believe it was early May of 2021. While he was in Oakland. Second baseman, Ozzie Albies. Shortstop, Orlando Arcia. Third baseman, Austin Riley. You know your catchers are Sean Murphy and Travis d'Arnaud. And for your rotation, you know that 4 of those, Max Fried, Spencer Strider, Charlie Morton, Chris Sale, no particular order on those. But what you're looking at is a battle for the 5th starter. You're looking at a battle for your bench roles, and then trying to figure out the proper configuration of your bullpen. So let's start with, I think, probably the most impactful of those, your number 5 starter. And this is not like it feels like it's a 2-man battle, right? Between Bryce Elder and Reynaldo López. And I think there's a little bit more to it than that. But let's dive into those guys. And the Reynaldo López one is really interesting because when Atlanta signed Reynaldo López, everybody said, hey, he's a really good reliever. And Atlanta came out and said, no, he is going to have an opportunity to start. He was a starter earlier in his career. Reynaldo López has made 97 starts in the major leagues. He's pitched 515 innings as a starter. His ERA was 4.73. He had a 1.372 whip during that span. His best year was 2018. He made 32 starts, covered 188 innings, had an ERA of under 4 at a 3.91, jumped to 5.3 ERA the next year in 33 starts. That was the juice ball year of 2019. And then he missed some time with vision problems and then converted over to a reliever. And as a reliever, we saw better velocity. We saw a better individual grades on his pitches, which happens when you have better velocity. And so the assumption was he's going to be a reliever. But if you notice, the day before pitchers and catchers report, the majority of the Atlanta beat was down there. David O'Brien of The Athletic, Justin Toscano of the AJC, Mark Bowman of MLB.com. And they all, in separate ways, tweets, articles, whatever, they all put out stories the same day about Reynaldo López is a legitimate candidate to get starts in the rotation this year. And that tells me a couple things. The first thing, that the concentrated announcement by the beat at the same time by all the BBWAA certified members tells me, one, that is a message that the team wanted to get out. I know sometimes you'll see at the winter meetings, sometimes you'll get the BWA members will meet with the team in the suite. It's all off the record. There's no quotes from that, but it kind of gives an idea of what the team's thinking is on certain parameters, things like that. This very much feels like one of those situations. Atlanta's front office in some way, whether it was through Alex Anthopoulos directly to them, whether it was through some other contact, wanted the message to get out that Reynaldo López will have an opportunity to start. And I don't know if that is because they want to push Bryce Elder to be better as the fifth starter. We'll get to him in a second. Or if they want to fulfill some sort of promise that they gave Lopez when they got him to sign in Atlanta, that he would have an opportunity to go back to starting. And Jake wrote a great piece soon after that happened, explaining why he doesn't know if Reynaldo López should be given chances to start or not, or should he stay as a reliever, owing to how spring training performances sometimes lie to us. Remember, Jared Schuster and Dylan Dodd had like the best ERAs in spring training last year. Neither one of them stuck in the rotation. Or changes in velocity or his better performance as a reliever. I will clarify here. Reynaldo López did have vision issues that he had that got resolved soon before he converted to relief. And so before those issues came up, he was a better starter than after those began to bother him. And it is possible his performance would be better as a starter now. I do think there is value to stretching out Reynaldo López in spring training, because if you need him in the rotation, it is easier to let him stretch out in spring, use him in a bulk capacity, and move him into a shorter role later than it is to have him start off as a single inning or maybe double inning guy to the bullpen to open the year. And then if you need a starter, try to stretch him out later. It does make sense to get him stretched out early. And then also having him stretched out gives you the advantage of, if you haven't overworked the bullpen recently, you can use him in a bulk role to maybe start games and then fill in with the bullpen behind him if you have an off day coming up, or put him into the game in relief of somebody who gets knocked out early to try to, in essence, buy yourself a sixth starter without having to explicitly carry six starters. Bryce Elder is an interesting one here in the battle for the sixth starter job, simply because I think we know that he was really good in the first half last year. We know that he was really bad in the second half last year. I think the question is, where is the true Bryce Elder? He's probably not as good as that first half where he threw 106 innings with an ERA of 2.97, right? But the second half, 13 starts, 68 and 2/3 innings. He should have gotten one more out. ERA of 5.11. He's not as bad, I think, as that second half. So where is the true Bryce Elder? Is he is a 4 ERA guy? Is he a 3.5? Is he a 4.5? Is he a 5? And I think now that he knows the amount of work required to start, in this case, he started 31 games and threw, when you count postseason and Gwinnett, threw over 180 innings last year. Brian Snicker talked about this at the winter meetings. Elder's talked about this in spring training so far. He's done a lot of different physical preparation to be ready for the demands of the season. I'm really curious to see where he ends up on the performance early in the year. Is Bryce Elder closer to that first half guy or that second half guy? And I really think that's going to be the ultimate decider in who is that fifth starter. If he shows in spring he's closer to that first half guy, he has a good chance of winning the job. And then you do have other options. Obviously, you've got guys like Alan Winans, who has back spasms, has not thrown a bullpen yet. You've got Darius Vines. You've got prospects AJ Smith-Shawver and Hurston Waldrop. I don't necessarily think either one of those guys should be considered favorites to break camp with the job. And for different reasons, right? Smith-Shawver is in a scenario where, if you look what he did last year, he pitched a total of 87 1/3 innings between high A, double A, triple A, and the majors last year, plus another, I think, 4 in the postseason. And so that's not, and I alluded to this yesterday in segment 3 when we're talking about rookie of the year. I don't think he's going to be able to handle the workload to be and to be a starting member of the rotation all season. And so if you think of AJ Smith-Shawver as we have limited bullets, when do you fire those bullets? Do you start him off in the rotation and run the possibility of him not being available later in the year? Or do you start him off in Gwinnett, maybe give him shorter outings and plan for a total innings exposure for AJ Smith-Shawver of something like 120 innings and to decide where you want those in the minors versus the majors? Hurston Waldrop, I love Hurston Waldrop. Just spoiler alert, BravesToday.com, we made him our number one prospect over AJ Smith-Shawver because of the skill of the splitter, because of the polish on the fastball, and the potential of the slider and the curveball to get better. But I don't know if a guy who has never pitched in the major leagues and was drafted last year is going to be able to seize a job in spring training and maintain that all year. I still think this is Bryce Elder versus Reynaldo López, and I don't know if you can go wrong with either one. The question is going to be which way do they go and what is a better option here. In just a minute, we're going to talk about the bench. We have clarity from some comments from Alex Anthopoulos, as well as some interesting movement defensively for some other members of Atlanta's roster. We'll talk about that next, right here on Locked On MLB Prospects. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Like buying tickets to sporting events, major league games, minor league games, or concerts, theater shows, whatever. It shouldn't be stressful, right? And what I love about Game Time is they take all of those stress and anxiety-inducing things out of the way, right? So you get the view from your seat before you buy. You know exactly what to expect when you get there because you've seen what the view is like from your seats, right? They give you an all-in price up front, so you know all of the taxes, all of the fees, and you can make an informed decision before you fall in love with these seats and then find out there's double the price in taxes, right? You buy the tickets in seconds with 2 taps. They're delivered directly to your device, and you get the Game Time guarantee. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less than what you paid with Game Time, they will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms and conditions do apply, but create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Lindsay Crosby filling in for Jake Mastriani. I'm your bench bat for the week here on Locked On Braves. We're talking about the opening day roster and who could potentially make the roster out of spring training. Looking at the bench, there's a couple decisions that feel very obvious and easy to me, right? 110% lock Travis d'Arnaud's on this roster, right? Luis Guillorme. You signed Luis Guillorme this offseason specifically. He understands he is walking into a situation where there's not a lot of playtime available for him. There's not a lot of at-bats available for him. He is on the bench in case you need something. That is, to me, as locky of a lock as you can possibly get, right? Outside of that, there's questions about the last 2 spots. And one of them is going to be an outfielder. And we got a little bit of clarity on this from Alex Anthopoulos when he talked about how tough it was to find members of the bench. He discussed that there's not a lot of playing time to go around. And so because of that, they've had instances, and he didn't name any names because he never does, but they've had instances where they talked to players and were trying to get them to gauge their interest in coming to Atlanta, and they didn't really want to come because, yes, you love winning, you love being part of an organization, but some of these guys, especially guys who are right there in that 29, 30, 31, 32 range, a lot of them are looking for an opportunity to show what they can do so that they can get picked up by another organization and have another opportunity to be a starter. And unless there's an injury in Atlanta, you're not going to get that. And Alex Anthopoulos admitted this, right? He talked about how hard it was to find members of the bench this offseason because of how little playtime there was to go around. And he did acknowledge that because we're going to use everybody every day, right? Garrett Kelenick's going to play every day. Because of that, it's going to impact your decisions on the bench a little bit. And one of the things that he specifically said is speed will play a factor in your decisions for the bench. And for me, with speed being a thing he specifically mentioned, that is a big, screaming, flashing light of Forrest Wall versus Eli White as your backup outfielder. And Eli White is a candidate, but I think Forrest Wall's the favorite. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, Forrest Wall was called up last July. He spent major league time with this team down the stretch last year. And that clubhouse fit does matter, right? Like, it is important. We know that Alex Anthopoulos values how a guy fits into the clubhouse. Forrest Wall has 266 career stolen bases in the minors. And you'll remember, he was 5 for 6 last year. But the first time he got into the game, if I have this right, was against the Brewers. And he stole 2 bases in 2 pitches in either the 9th or the 10th as the Braves were trying to rally. They didn't win the game, but he got over to third base in a hurry to give Atlanta an opportunity to tie the game up. And so you combine that with his defensive ability in the outfield. And I think the familiarity, everything, he has to be the favorite, but don't count Eli White out of this. He's had some injuries in the past. He was talking to, I think it was Justin Toscano of the AJC on Wednesday, talking about he's healthy, he feels good, and he's not as accomplished a base stealer in the minors as Wall. He's 73 of 97. Again, Wall is 261 of 337. But Eli White's sprint speed, his sheer how fast can he run, he's actually faster than Forrest Wall. Forrest Wall put up a 28.2 feet per second last year. Eli White put up a 30.0, which I believe is the MLB classification to have a bolt, or maybe it's 31. Point is, Eli White is faster from a sheer speed on the gun perspective than Forrest Wall. He can also play defense really well. And so it feels like one of those two guys is going to be your backup outfielder because you don't have to give them everyday at bats. You're not counting on them to carry the load offensively as somebody gets hurt. They are there for defense. They are there to rotate in if you need somebody to finish a game. You need a pinch hitter, a pinch runner, things like that. And then JP Martinez, who you went out and got from the Rangers, Jordan Luplow, who you signed as a minor league free agent. I think he was a major league free agent last year, minor league free agent this year. It makes sense. Those two guys are your primary everyday replacements if somebody gets hurt. If Michael Harris misses time, God forbid Ronald Acuna Jr. misses time, if Kelenic misses time, one of those two guys gets called up to play every day in the outfield in the absence of one of those guys. And so the loser of the Forrest Wall, Eli White battle, JP Martinez and Jordan Luplow, those are your 3 starters in Gwinnett on an everyday basis down there. The big question for me, and I've written about this a little bit at bravestoday.com, is what you do for shortstop. Do you have David Fletcher up every day? Because reminder, David Fletcher is owed a combined $14.5 million over the next couple of years. 24 and 25 combined, I think it's $12.5 million. And he has a $1.5 million buyout for 2026. And David Fletcher's not going to play at the major league level. Barring an injury, you're not going to put David Fletcher into the game. And so I really wonder do you leave David Fletcher in the minors and let him play every day in the hopes that he absolutely just rakes and somebody desperate for a shortstop takes the contract? Do you do that knowing that Luis Guillorme could fill in for 3 innings if, God forbid, something happened to Orlando Arcia, right? Luis Guillorme could step in for 3 games. And then you use that 4th bench spot on a guy like a Luke Williams or somebody else that could give you some more versatility than a guy like a David Fletcher. You do have other shortstop options, Andrew Vasquez, Lurie Garcia. I don't necessarily know if either one of those guys makes the roster over Fletcher. That 4th spot is really interesting. And what I do think is I think Atlanta doesn't necessarily roll with somebody like a Luke Williams, who's really only corner infielder with maybe an occasional outfield thing, because they feel good about Marcell Ozuna playing first base to finish a game if they have to. You have multiple. You've seen him. He did it in practices last year. He played first base for the squad games. They used him in defensive drills down in Northport this week, working behind Matt Olson at first base. And so if you were to lose Matt Olson in the 7th inning or something, Austin Riley can cover first. He did that in 22. Luis Guillorme could cover first. And you probably could throw Marcell Ozuna out there for an inning or two. So what do you do with that 4th spot if you don't need that corner infield guy like a Luke Williams to play first and third, because you have Guillorme and the ability to stick Ozuna there for a couple innings and then make a call up for somebody else for the next day? Really interesting thing here. I'm going to be watching what happens with this infield in spring training, which depth players get an extra run, so we can figure out who's going to be the bench and who's going to be in Gwinnett. In just a minute, let's talk about the back end of the bullpen. We know a lot of these roles. There's a little bit unsettled. We'll do that next, right here on Locked On MLB, on Locked On Braves. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. It is NBA season right now, so get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet all your favorite NBA players and teams. They've got quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. And then take your $150 in bonus bets and go throw it on all of the different Braves who have amazing odds at MVP, at Cy Young, Manager of the Year, all leading the league in homers. Acuna's on the board for that, individual props, things like that. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA and the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Final segment of Locked On Braves. Again, Lindsay Crosby, your bench bat, filling in for Jake Mastriani this week. And similar situation in the bullpen as to the lineup, right? Most of these guys and their roles. And the question is, what depth pieces make the team? And some of that depends on the other jobs, right? If Reynaldo López is the 5th starter with Bryce Elder in Gwinnett, who he was the opening day started there last year, that does impact, that gives you a spot now in the bullpen to add somebody else. Because the scenario you're in now in the bullpen, this is really interesting. Atlanta doesn't project, as of now, assuming Lopez is in the bullpen, Atlanta doesn't project to have anybody with a minor league option available. The 8 guys that you have back there are your 8 guys, and you can't send any of them to AAA unless they get hurt and go on the injured list. And we saw the issues with faking injury list placements and what that did to the Mets. So you're not going to do that. Or you're willing to try to pass somebody through waivers, right? So right now, the roles that we know, Raisel Iglesias is your closer. We know that. Your setup men, AJ Minter is your lefty setup guy. And I'm assuming if Reynaldo López is in the bullpen and working as a single inning reliever, that he's your righty setup man. If he is either not working in a single inning role or he's not in the bullpen, Pierce Johnson's probably your righty setup guy. And I say that because Brian Snitker didn't really want to use Joe Jimenez in high leverage opportunities last year. There were other players that he would go to before he went to Joe Jimenez. Kirby Yates had, I think, 4 times the number of save opportunities than Joe Jimenez got. And it was something where you gave up a legitimate asset to get Joe Jimenez. You gave up Justin Henry Malloy, who is now solidly an outfielder, but has some of the best plate discipline, walk rates in the minors, and is a contender to make the opening day roster in Detroit. You re-signed Joe Jimenez, but you won't use him in high leverage spots. And so because of that, I'm hesitant to say, yes, he's going to be a setup guy if Lopez is not in the bullpen. Pierce Johnson feels like he's going to be that guy, right? Behind that, you've got some lefties. You've got Tyler Matzik. You've got Aaron Bummer. Again, I'm assuming you have Joe Jimenez to work behind that. It's really interesting to me to figure out who is your backup closer if you've used your core guys? Again, Iglesias, Minter, Johnson, maybe Lopez. That's your core four. You always got to have a core four. And if that's your core four, it feels like your backup closer, when he's ready, is Tyler Matzek. We've seen lefty closers work for Atlanta before. Will Smith obviously did that. Speaking of, obviously the trick to winning the World Series is to go get Will Smith. He's been on the last 3 World Series champions on 3 separate teams. He's now a member of the Kansas City Royals, so I don't think they're going to do it, but I wonder if the FanDuel odds changed when they signed him. And then Aaron Butmer, another lefty, in your bullpen. He's on a long-term deal. Barring some sort of injury, he's going to be in your bullpen as well. That last role, for now, I'm assuming it's Jackson Stephens. And that's something where they've shown the propensity to use him in a bulk kind of role. Obviously, he's not been bad at it. Some of the other guys, Penn Murphy's not going to be ready to go. Ray Kerr is an option here, but you always want to have that guy who can be a bulk guy. And again, he doesn't have any options. Jackson Stephens feels like he's going to be that guy to me, where he's at the back of the bullpen. He can take the ball for 3 innings if somebody gets blown out, knocked out of the game early. He can come in and give you some length. And then again, this is where I think stretching out Reynaldo López in spring training, even if you don't use him as a starter, this is where that is useful because he gives you a second guy in the pen who you feel comfortable throwing for multiple innings if something were to happen. The worst thing to do in the world, the worst feeling for a manager or a pitching coach, I guess, is to be in the first day of like 3-game or 4-game series. Your starter gets blown up early and you got to throw your bulk guy and use a lot of your bullpen pieces in game 1, right? Only having one bulk guy in the bullpen seems to be a little bit like you're asking for trouble. And so if you stretch López out, having him as the ability to do bulk innings as well, I think is really useful. And then in AAA, you've got a lot of options. One of your big unknowns here, Huascar Ynoa. Coming back from Tommy John, mostly a fastball slider guy. Does he get that changeup? He said he's been working on it like over the offseason. Does he get to the point where you're comfortable using him in the bullpen at the major league level, or do you want him to continue working as a starter and polishing stuff in Gwinnett? You've got a couple NRIs, Taylor Widener, Ken Giles, Hayden Harris is an undrafted free agent out of Georgia Southern I'm really excited about. We actually had him on Locked On MLB Prospects back in the fall before the NLDS. Ben Bowden, Grant Holmes, Jake Walsh, a couple other options here. But it feels like a lot of these guys, one, they have options. You can start them in the minors. Doyle has an option. Bowden has an option. Walsh has an option. Hayden Harris isn't on your 40-man roster yet, so he obviously is easy to put down there. And so Dylan Lee has multiple options. You can start him in the minors. Daysbel Hernandez has all 3 options still. You can start him in the minors. It feels like you're either going to try to slip one of those guys like a Jackson Stephens through waivers and start him in Gwinnett, knowing that you can swap one guy out. You could swap a Dylan Lee for Jackson Stephens or somebody else. Or you're going to start off with your bullpen having no optionable guys and but have to deal with the realization of we can't swap guys out unless there's an injury. So how that bullpen is constructed is going to be really interesting. I think that's a really interesting thing to watch. We're not going to know what happens until the end of spring training, but watching for that's my projection is you're going to see López in the bullpen, but stretched out. You're going to see Matzek as your backup closer once they feel like he's ready to go. He hinted he might need a rehab stint before he starts the season, which does give you more flexibility as well because you can put somebody else in who has an option like a Daysbel Hernandez and start Matzek in the minors. We'll see what happens there. Fantastic week this week. One more show coming up tomorrow. It's a mailbag. Reminder, if you have questions you want either me or Jake to answer, I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. This show's on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves. Got YouTube comments down there. Leave those for us. Until next time, go Braves.